Greetings to Vignetos. It should be obvious by now, listening to major GOP candidates, that one of their major targets is critical intellect itself. This is nothing new to the 2012 election season. It's been ongoing for a couple decades now, and has been led by the likes of Newt Gingrich, a college professor, and you'd think an unlikely leader for an anti-intellectual movement. After all, isn't one of the main conservative complaints the dumbing down of America? Well, think again, dummies. Those who raise this issue are themselves the leading perpetrators of mass idiocy. And this goes beyond the all-too-evident anti-intellectualism of GOP leaders like Sarah Palin or Michelle Bachmann, GOP commentators like Rush Limbaugh or Michelle Malkin or Ann Coulter. Not that they advocate the outright public repression of critical thought. That would be unconstitutional. After all, the right of free speech, free thought, free inquiry are allegedly the law of the land. No. They're not stupid enough to try that. There are other ways to achieve an unthinking, inarticulate public that accepts what, if not really believes as, it's told. Just as there are other ways to rig the electoral system to preserve dominant class privileges. No one was ever refused the right to vote directly because of race after 1865. That was against federal law. No, what you do is structure the playing field so as to disqualify certain groups by raising standards and selectively applying them. You deny people the right to vote through poll taxes, mandatory ID cards, property qualifications, answering arcane questions on constitutional law, disfranchising paroled felons, barring election day registration, etc. Similarly, you undercut the public's critical thinking capability not by direct assault on the right to think and speak, but by defunding the basis of them at the source. And that source is public education, from Head Start to state-funded universities. By slashing budgets for public schools, or redirecting tax dollars into voucher programs for private schooling, or recognizing homeschooling, or increasingly popular privatizing schools through intervention programs that transform failing, cash-starved public schools into private charter schools, where private agencies cherry-pick students and curriculum according to the administration's private standards, values, and agenda. In such schools, it's quite common to see a specifically capital-friendly, pro-military, patriotic, and often religious agenda forwarded upon the student body. Certainly any critical thought directed toward society and state on a broad range of issues is quite discouraged among their students. In many charter schools, you find a passive acceptance of established authority and curriculum and staff than you ever could have in public schools, even during McCarthy days. But the spectacle of persecuting teachers or banning books will not happen in charter schools because teachers and curriculum are carefully vetted from the get-go so that such conflicts don't happen. The instruction is more rigid in these respects than in even a Jesuit university. There is a broad social and political reason for this, other than the profit of charter schools, which is, of course, a major factor, along with privatizing prisons. I'll get back to that agenda in a moment, but first I'll mention a couple of examples. In Pennsylvania, state funding for education continues to go directly to the charters, while the Chester Upland Public School District is on the verge of bankruptcy, some $20 million in the hole. The charters are suing for funds they still claim are due to them, while the district has shed 40% of its teachers and half its unionized staff. It should come as no surprise that this district is mostly poor, black, and Latino. The average class size hovers around 40. This is deliberate policy by Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett. There's a name that'll choke you up. Who said, when we have failing schools, we know we have failing students. But why are they failing? They're being forced to fail by deliberate defunding of public institutions, rerouting this public money into privatization at public expense. Another way to deconstruct public education is from within. In Florida, the good old Koch brothers have literally bought the University of Florida. Through their contributions, their agents have usurped the right to hire teachers, to set curriculum, and monitor classrooms. Instructors are vetted according to conformity to free market, patriotic ideology. Any deviation from this agenda results in disciplinary action, up to termination, as of course tenure is one of those major obstacles to market reform education. Which brings me back to the root reason for this war on critical thought, and the push for classroom indoctrination through privatization. For some 20 years, from the mid-50s to the mid-70s, that period roughly dubbed the 60s, major social movements arose from the public campuses of the United States. The freedom marchers, freedom riders, freedom sitters came out of publicly funded schools, and the anti-Vietnam movement, feminism, gay rights, you name it. The whole regalia of disrespect, led by tenured radical professors like Noam Chomsky. Ever since those days when it lost control of the public mind, the U.S. right has been itching to reclaim academia, to subordinate it once and for all to private authority, like the economy and, in great measure, the courts. But applying this stranglehold has been a problem. The idea of public education has been such a sacred cow that it couldn't be touched. So rather than slaughter the beast, they'll milk it dry. But there really is nothing new in all this. In 1877, an anonymous author calling himself Civis wrote a series of articles against public education in the Southern Planter and Farmer, published in Richmond, Virginia. His main angst was the biracial, publicly funded school system established in that state during Reconstruction. But he took some unfortunately now familiar swipes at the entire concept of public education, such as, and I will quote directly, if I can find it here, in a series of articles over the signature of Civis, which appeared in the Religious Herald last spring and summer, I demonstrated that the political principles which are evoked in the support of the public school are foreign to free institutions and fatal to liberty. That the theory upon which the system is based is well calculated to emasculate the energies of a people and to debauch public and private morality. That the education of children is not the business of government, but the sacred and imperative duty of parents. That the assumption by the state, as the system requires, of the duties, privileges, and prerogatives that belong only to the personal or parental relation is a wicked and dangerous denial of the reciprocal relations and obligations of parent and child, as proclaimed by nature and taught with solemn emphasis over and over by God, by Christ, and his apostles. That the cost of instruction at the public school is, as to those whose money supports it, greater than that of better instruction at the private school, and that the enforced charity is really an injury to the party receiving it and to the party robbed and wronged by unjust taxation. That granting, for the sake of argument, the system to be in itself desirable, Virginia is forbidden by simple honesty to patronize it, for she can only do it, as she is doing today, with money which is not her own, money withheld from its rightful owners, the creditors of the Commonwealth. Okay, moving along. The cook that must read the daily paper will spoil your beef and your bread. The sable pickaninny that has to do with grammar and arithmetic will leave your boots unblacked and your horse uncurried. Some, and a great many too, are and must be mudsills. Some are and must be hewers of wood and drawers of water. Such is the decree, and the language quoted is that of the Almighty. This doctrine, so unpalatable to our fanatical optimists, has been most fiercely attacked, but these assaults, hot with wrath, have made no impression on the thick bosses of Jehovah's buckler, in other words, God. Society, left to the operation of natural causes, will take its proper order of stratification. Each member, according to his inherent energy and capacity, will find his proper place in just gradation. To protect the individual in his rights, not to form society, is the function of government. As individuals have or lack capacity, they will rise or sink. And they will rise who ought to rise, and they will sink who ought to sink. To check or attempt to check one from sinking who ought to sink is as great a cruelty to him and as disastrous to society as to prevent or attempt to prevent one from rising who ought to rise. We may endeavor by legislation, as weak as it is wicked, to prevent the stratification or to make it homogeneous and uniform, but so sure as God is stronger than man, the attempt will end in failure, inflicting, however untold, misery on individuals and crippling, it may be, the industries of the globe. Okay? Well, moving forward, if not upward. But whether children are to grow up ignorant or not is not a proper question for government. The fact that it is assumed that government may take the whole matter of the education of the children of the state into its parental hands most painfully shows how far we have been corrupted from the simplicity of our fathers. According to the American theory, government is not personal or parental, but is a mere agency which we may alter or abolish at pleasure when it fails to accomplish the purposes for which it was instituted. Government is the creature of society, not society the creature of government. The government belongs to the people, not the people to the government. It is the proper function of government to protect the rights of individuals, not to form society. Whether this means protect the rights of mudsills is not clear from this scripture. Now our government, state or federal, cannot undertake the education of the people without violating its foundation maxims. If our government can prescribe when our children shall go to school, where and to whom, when they shall learn and what they shall not learn, it is plain that it can mold to its pleasures the feelings and sentiments of the rising generation. It forms society. A party in power can easily perpetuate its existence. In some of the states, the whole public school machinery has been run avowedly in the interest of the radical party. Under such a system, the voters of the country are fabricated and fashioned by government. To support the public school is to abandon the American theory of government. Nor is it calculated to abate our fears when we observe how responsive the states are to the suggestions of the central government, which, not satisfied with pliant civility, is evidently preparing to clutch the whole system and wield its incalculable power in the furtherance of its projects. Under such a system, what chance is there of sound moral culture when a chapter of the Bible can be read only by sufferance, when the only infallible source of ethics must be positively excluded or timidly employed? The mere cultivation of the intellectual powers, without the proper cultivation of the moral faculties, furnishes no safeguard against vice and crime. It enlarges the desires, it is true, but this enlargement is not accompanied by corresponding moral restraints to prevent their unlawful gratification. It only puts into the heart a stronger temptation, and into the hand a keener instrument for crime. Such has always been the fruit which this tree has borne. It first took root and flourished among the ancient Spartans, and soon their creed was perfidy and their virtue theft. So, substitute the flowery Victorian prose for 21st century sound bites, and there you have it. A very familiar rhetoric, the privileged refusing to be taxed for the education of mudsills because such a system will subvert the natural class hierarchy and racial realism of master and servant on which Christian civilization must be built. These are likewise the GOP's education reform goals, so far being enacted at the state level, but if they have their way after 2012, to knock on the phone. Who is it this time? Hello? Newt Gingrich? Resent my quote mining you in this video? Hold on. I did not use a single word of yours. If you as a presidential candidate sound like a reactionary racist elitist of the 1870s, that just shows how far America is already indeed dumbing down the drain.